Deep in the untamed Carpathian mountains, where golden oak forests conceal ancient secrets, the village of Valia Amara once slumbered beneath the mountain's shadow for 1,000 years. But when the earth trembled and the Alt River roared, nature was no longer a guardian, it became a destroyer. Amid the ruins left by earthquakes and floods, Elena, a resilient shepherd girl, heard the whispers from the depths of the forest, the growl of Ursa the bear, the howl of Vulp the fox, and the cry of Lena the sparrow. They were not just wild beasts, they were her last allies in the battle against the fury of the earth and sky. But as toxic fumes rose from the heart of the mountains, the enemy was no longer just nature, it was the doubt among survivors, the betrayal of their own kind, and the lingering ghosts of old grudges. Can Elena and her silent companions save the shattered valley, or will everything be swallowed by the eternal darkness of the Carpathians? The struggle for survival begins here, where every step is a choice between life and death. Part 1. Signs of Unrest. It all began on an autumn morning when the oak leaves in the forest turned brilliant gold. Elena was guiding her sheep across the hillside when she heard an unusual cry from the sparrows. They scattered in panic, breaking their usual formation. At the forest's edge, Ursu appeared, rising on his hind legs with a low growl, his eyes locked on the distant mountain peaks. Vulp circled Elena's feet, letting out short, urgent howls. She felt the tension in the air, the ground trembled slightly beneath her feet, but the villagers dismissed it as nothing more than strong Carpathian winds. Elena rushed back to the village to warn them, but Mihai, the rigid village elder, waved it off. Just frightened animals. The mountains have stood for thousands of years. Only her brother, Radu, believed her, especially when their flock began showing signs of distress. That night, the tremors grew stronger, and from deep within the forest, the cries of wild animals echoed, a final warning before disaster struck. Part 2. Earthquake and Flood. At dawn, a devastating earthquake shook the Carpathians. Rocks tumbled down from the mountain peaks, destroying the narrow paths leading out of the valley. Valia Amara was cut off, its wooden houses collapsing under thick clouds of dust and debris. Before the villagers could recover, the Alt River burst its banks. Water from the mountain crevices surged downward, forming a flash flood that tore through the valley, carrying mud, uprooted trees, and shattered homes. Elena grabbed Radu and a small group of villagers, including 10-year-old Anna and the elderly blacksmith Doru, leading them to higher ground. But their escape was blocked by massive boulders from the landslide. Suddenly, Ursa charged out from the forest, using his immense strength to push aside a rock, creating a path. Vulp led her pack of foxes ahead, scouting for a safe route through the rising waters, guiding them away from the approaching flood. Part 3. Unlikely Allies. The survivors found temporary refuge on a small hill amidst the flooded oak forest. The water continued to rise, and the cold wind from the Carpathians carried the scent of damp earth and ash. Elena knelt before Ursu, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Thank you?" The bear rumbled softly, nudging her hand with his nose. Vulp stood nearby, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings while her fox pack patrolled the area. "We need the animals to survive," Elena urged the group. "They know these forests better than we do." Radu agreed, but Doru, wary of wild creatures, protested. "Bears and foxes bring nothing but trouble." Just then, Anna slipped and was swept away by the floodwaters. Without hesitation, Ursa plunged into the raging current, gripping the girl with his claws and pulling her onto his back before swimming her to safety. Doru fell silent, watching in awe. The old man, once fearful, now understood. Perhaps the wild was not their enemy after all. Part 4. A Fight for Survival. Inside the cave, the humans and animals were momentarily safe, but outside, the flood grew fiercer, with water creeping into the entrance. The earth continued to tremble, sending fragments of rock crashing from the ceiling. Elena discovered a narrow escape route at the back of the cave, but it was only wide enough for humans. Ursu and his fellow bears couldn't fit through. She embraced the great bear, tears streaming down her face. "You have to live!" But Ursu nudged her toward the exit, standing firm with his kin at the entrance to block the rising water. Vulp darted out, leading her pack around a massive boulder that obstructed their final escape. A small landslide from the mountain loomed overhead, but Vulp lured it off course, sacrificing herself to save the group. Elena screamed in despair as the fox disappeared beneath the cascade of earth and stone. The survivors crawled through the narrow passage, emerging onto higher ground in the valley. When they looked back, all they could see was floodwater and dust swallowing the cave. Part 5. A New Dawn. Standing on higher ground, the survivors watched as the floodwaters slowly receded, leaving behind a shattered valley, but not without signs of life. Golden autumn sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the remaining oak trees. Elena knelt, mourning Ursu and Vulp, but Radu placed a firm hand on her shoulder. They gave us a chance. Don't let it be in vain. A small sparrow landed on Elena's hand, chirping as if to comfort her. She rose to her feet, vowing to rebuild Valia Amara into a place where humans and animals could coexist. From the ruins, she picked up a single surviving potato seed and planted it into the earth, marking the beginning of something new in the heart of the Carpathians. Chapter 6. The Earth Still Trembles. After surviving the flood, Elena, Radu, Anna, Doru, and the other survivors stood on their newfound high ground, a sloping hill covered in dry grass and scattered stones from the Carpathians. The air was still thick with the scent of mud and decayed wood, but the autumn sun broke through the clouds, offering a fragile warmth in the desolation. Anna clung tightly to Elena, her wide eyes haunted by the rushing waters. The elderly blacksmith, Doru, examined his frail hands and muttered, "I never thought I'd live to see another day." A small cry echoed from the sky. The sparrow, now named Lena, circled above before perching on a nearby rock, her bright eyes locked onto Elena. Elena understood the message. They were safe for now, but danger still lurked. "We need to build shelter before nightfall," she said with quiet determination. Radu nodded, pulling a handful of potato seeds from his torn pocket, the only remnants of last season's crop. "The soil is still good," he said. "If we plant now, we'll have food by spring." Doru began gathering stones to form a foundation for a temporary shelter, but his hands trembled as he recalled Ursa's gaze before his sacrifice. Elena approached, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to fear the wild anymore. It saved us." Doru slowly nodded, for the first time without protest. That night, they built a crude shelter from oak branches and stone, lighting a small fire to keep warm. But just as they began to doze off, the earth rumbled once more, not as violently as before, but enough to send loose rocks tumbling down the slope. Elena shot up, heart pounding. In the distance, she heard the growls of wild animals and, worse, human voices shouting. A group of strangers was approaching from the ruins of the valley. Chapter 7. The Survivors. As the first light of dawn filtered through the golden oak leaves, a band of strangers emerged, 15 rough-looking figures led by a tall, gaunt woman with short black hair and piercing eyes. Her name was Mara. They wore tattered clothing, wielding wooden clubs and hunting knives. Behind them, makeshift sleds fashioned from tree branches carried stolen supplies scavenged from abandoned villages along the Alt River. Mara smirked at the sight of Elena's camp. "You think this place is yours? Hand over everything, or we'll take it by force." Elena stepped forward unarmed, her gaze steady. "We have nothing but seeds and hope. What is there to steal from ruins?" Mara snarled, raising her knife to strike, but a deep, guttural growl froze everyone in place. From the oak forest, a young bear with sleek, golden-brown fur emerged. Her muscles tensed, her claws gleaming in the morning light. Livia, Ursa's daughter. She stood protectively in front of Elena, growling, her sharp eyes locked onto Mara's group. Radu instinctively reached for a wooden branch as a weapon, but Elena stopped him. "Don't," she whispered. "She's protecting us." Livia did not attack immediately, she only let out a powerful warning roar, forcing Mara's gang to take hesitant steps backward on the damp ground. Anna clutched Elena's sleeve. "Elena, why is she helping us?" Elena's eyes softened. "Because Ursa left his family to us." She ordered her followers to hurl stones at Livia. A rock struck the bear's shoulder, making her roar in pain and charge forward, smashing one of the sleds. Elena screamed, "Stop! We can live together. There's no need for bloodshed." Her voice cut through the wind, momentarily halting both sides. Mara sneered at her. "Live together? With the weak and wild beasts?" Just then, Lena dived from the sky, her sharp beak pecking the hand of one of Mara's men. A cry of pain rang out, and panic spread among the intruders. Elena shouted, "Leave, or face the wrath of the wilderness!" Livia stepped forward, the ground trembling beneath her weight. Mara clenched her teeth but ultimately gave the order to retreat. Before leaving, she threw one last warning over her shoulder. "I will return, this time, with no mercy." Chapter 8: Seeds in the Cold Earth. After the confrontation, Elena's group fortified their settlement on the Carpathian hillside. Livia stayed, though she limped from her wound. Elena carefully dressed the bear's injury with nettle leaves Doru had gathered, whispering, "Thank you, child of Ursu." Livia let out a soft growl, pressing her nose against Elena's hand in acknowledgement. Radu used his knowledge of animal husbandry to build a protective fence from oak branches and stones, shielding them from new threats. Even little Anna, shivering from the cold, helped plant the first potato seeds in the ashen soil, her small hands trembling. Weeks passed. Tiny green sprouts emerged from the earth of ash and rubble, signaling the start of a new life in the wild mountains. But Elena knew danger still loomed. One afternoon, Lena returned, chirping frantically. Elena climbed the hilltop and saw them. Mara's group had returned, larger this time, armed with nets and iron-tipped spears. They weren't just here to steal. They wanted to take the hill as their stronghold for the harsh Carpathian winter. Elena gathered the others. "We can't keep running. This is our home, and we must defend it." Radu nodded, gripping a wooden club, standing beside her without hesitation for the first time. Doru suggested, "Use the terrain. If they come up the hillside, we can use Livia and Lena." Elena agreed but thought beyond just repelling the attack. She needed to make their enemies understand that survival lay in cooperation, not conquest. That night, she sat by the fire under the vast Carpathian sky, watching the fragile potato sprouts tremble in the cold wind. She whispered to Lena, perched on her shoulder, "If you're still watching over us, help us once more." The wind whistled through the oaks, carrying distant echoes, perhaps the growl of Ursu, or the howl of Vulp. Elena clenched her fists, knowing their spirits still watched over the broken mountains. Chapter 9: Fire Roars in the Night. On the eve of their battle with Mara's group, the air over the Carpathian hillside was heavy, like a warning. Elena stood by the small fire, watching its flickering light dance over the young potato shoots. Her heart was torn between the resolve to protect their land and the fear of losing those she loved. Lena perched on her shoulder, chirping short, urgent notes, sensing the danger creeping ever closer. Radu stepped forward, his voice low but tense. "Are you sure about this, Elena? Mara isn't just some common bandit. They're more, they're fiercer." Elena looked at her brother, recognizing the doubt in his eyes, not doubt in her, but the fear of losing more family after their parents' deaths. "If we don't hold this land," she replied, "we'll have nothing left to lose." Doru, the old blacksmith, suddenly interjected, his voice rough. "I agree with Radu. I've seen Livia's strength, but she's just one bear. What if they kill her? What if they kill us? I don't want to die for some wild animals." His words cut through the group like a cold wind, making Anna curl up, hugging her knees, trembling. Internal conflict flared, the fragile trust between them wavered. Elena took a deep breath, looking at the group. "I'm not forcing anyone to stay. But if we run, Mara will hunt us down. Livia and Lena aren't just wild beasts, they're the family I've lost." Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled again, stronger this time. In the distance, Mara's torches flickered against the dark, accompanied by rough laughter and the clash of metal. They were ready to attack. Chapter 10: The Blood-Stained Hill. As dawn broke through the golden oak trees of the Carpathians, Mara's group advanced up the hillside. Mara led them, gripping a rusted sword salvaged from the ruins of an old village, her sharp eyes locked onto Elena. "I warned you," she growled. "Give me this land, or die in the depths of the forest!" Behind her, her followers held ropes and iron spears, ready to surround them. Elena stood at the crude barricade of oak branches and stones, unarmed, with only Livia beside her and Lena circling above. "There doesn't have to be bloodshed," she shouted over the wind. "Help us rebuild instead!" But Mara only laughed mockingly and swung her sword, signaling the attack. Livia roared and charged, her claws slashing across the enemy line, sending two of Mara's men tumbling into the grass and rubble. Lena dived from the sky, striking one of them in the eye, throwing the group into chaos. Radu held his wooden club, standing firm beside Elena. But Doru stepped back, panic in his eyes. "I won't die for this!" he shouted, turning and running toward the forest. His retreat left a gap in the barricade, one Mara's warriors were quick to exploit. Mara's group seized the opportunity, throwing a net over Livia. The bear thrashed, but the net tightened, dragging it to the ground. Elena rushed forward, tearing at the net with her bare hands, shouting, "Radu, help me!" Radu ran to her, but a bandit drove a spear into his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. Anna screamed, rushing to hold him, while Mara approached Elena, sword raised high. "It's over!" At that moment, a howl echoed from the forest. A pack of foxes, the descendants of Vulp, led by a smaller red fox named Rusu, burst out, sinking their teeth into Mara's followers' legs. Lena circled above, distracting the enemy. Livia broke free from the net, unleashing a roar that tore through the air before lunging at Mara. Mara's sword slipped from her grasp as she fell backward, pinned under the furious bear. Chapter 11. Breathe beneath the earth. After the bloody battle, Mara's group scattered. Some survivors fell to their knees, pleading for mercy, including Petru, a frail young man who had once been Mara's friend. He revealed that Mara had grown up in poverty, losing her family in an old flood, and had led the bandits to survive through the harsh years. Elena met Petru's gaze, her expression hardened. "She chose this path. But you can choose differently. Stay or leave." Petru nodded, agreeing to stay and atone for his past. Livia stood nearby, breathing heavily, blood oozing from the cuts left by the net. Elena wrapped her arms around the bear, tears falling. "Thank you." Greta bandaged Rada's shoulder, but he whispered to Elena, "Doru is gone. He doesn't believe in us." Internal conflict still simmered beneath the surface, even as their victory against Mara temporarily held them together. But their relief was short-lived. The ground trembled more violently than ever, causing the oak trees on the hillside to topple. A massive fissure split open near the village, spewing out thick, yellow gas, reeking of sulfur. Lena shrieked in distress, circling above. Rusu and the foxes howled, fleeing into the forest. Elena stared at the fissure, sensing a new threat, poisonous gas seeping from the depths of the Carpathians, capable of wiping out all life in the valley. She turned to the group. "We have to stop it, or we all die." Petru trembled. "But how do you stop the earth itself?" Despite his pain, Radu stood. "If we don't try, Ursu and Vulp's deaths will have been in vain." Livia growled as if agreeing to lead them, but in Elena's heart, a question gnawed at her. Would Doru return to help them, or would he carry his doubts to their enemies? Chapter 12. Poison beneath the forest. The Carpathian slopes lay heavy with tension after the battle with Mara. Elena stood atop a mound, watching the yellow gas spread through the oak forest, tinting the autumn leaves a sickly gold. The sharp sulfur stench burned her throat, making her cough. Livia stood beside her, growling uneasily, her dark brown fur matted with blood from her old wounds. Lena circled above, shrieking in alarm, while Rusu and the foxes retreated deeper into the woods, avoiding the deadly fumes. Radu, still nursing his wounded shoulder, stepped beside Elena. "We can't stay here long. This gas will kill everything." Petru, the former bandit, shivered. "I've seen people die from this. In an old mine nearby. They dropped dead without a sound." Anna clung to Elena, her voice trembling. "Elena, what do we do?" Elena squeezed her hand, determination in her eyes. We have to block the fissure, or at least divert the gas elsewhere. But tensions flared once more. Doru, who had fled the battle, had not returned. Radu murmured to Elena, "He could be out there, telling others about us. If they believe him, we'll have more enemies." Elena nodded, a weight pressing on her chest. "We can't force him to believe. But if he turns against us, we'll have to face him." A plan took shape. Elena, Radu, and Petru would enter the forest to find the fissure's source, using rocks and soil to block the gas if possible. Livia would lead the way, her keen nose detecting danger zones. Rusu and the foxes would scout ahead for a safe path. But as they prepared to set off, another tremor cracked the earth, releasing an even thicker surge of poison, forcing them to retreat up the hill to avoid suffocation. Chapter 13: A Traitor in the Shadows. After escaping the gas, Elena's group took refuge in a small cave along the Carpathian slopes. A fire crackled weakly, but the air was cold with unease. Petru huddled in the corner, whispering, "Mara isn't dead. I saw her crawl out from under Livia while everyone else fled. She won't forgive us." Elena frowned. "If she's alive, she'll return. But for now, we have to focus on the gas." Radu, despite his injury, reassured Anna. "We'll survive, like we always have." But Anna shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "What if Doru doesn't come back? He hates me because I believe in you." Elena hugged the girl, murmuring, "He doesn't hate you. He's afraid. And fear changes people." That night, as the others slept, a shadow appeared at the cave entrance. Elena snapped awake, recognizing Doru, but he wasn't alone. 3 strangers stood beside him, gripping clubs and knives, their eyes sharp with hostility. Doru pointed at Elena, his voice hoarse. "She's leading us to death. I told them, she's mad, trusting beasts over men." One of the strangers, a man named Grigor, snarled, "Hand over your food and shelter, or die." Livia growled, lunging from the shadows, her claws knocking Grigor to the ground. Rusu and the foxes leaped from the underbrush, sinking their teeth into the invader's legs. Doru staggered back, shouting, "Stop! This isn't what I wanted!" But Grigor drove a knife into Livia's leg, making the bear roar in pain. Elena rushed forward, shoving Doru aside. "You chose the wrong side." The skirmish was brief. Grigor's group fled, dragging Doru with them, leaving Livia wounded and gasping on the cold earth. A daring plan was set in motion. The group would climb to the mountain's peak and use rocks and wood to seal the gas vent. But the path was treacherous, filled with loose stones and poisonous fumes. Elena led the way, with Livia limping beside her, while Rusu and the foxes scouted ahead. Radu supported Anna, and Petru carried a small bag of stones to block the vent. As they neared the summit, a shadow emerged from the mist. Mara, alive and filled with hatred, stood alongside Grigor, Doru, and a larger group of followers. Mara smirked, gripping her sword. "I told you this wasn't over. Now die." At that moment, the ground trembled violently, and the vent erupted with an even stronger surge of gas, throwing both sides into greater peril than ever before.